And so I think it all starts with the core values, the mission, and constantly repeating yourself as a leader, because, people learn differently, and sometimes people need to hear things a lot, but they also need to see my words align with my actions, with what we are saying as the organization is where we're striving to be. But it's not just me, it's every leader in the organization. We must do the same thing.
So how do we implement big changes like we're talking about here? You come into an organization 130 plus years old, right? They've been doing things the same way for a long time. So that creates that sense of complacency of saying, we've always done it this way. You come in and say, we need to get the foundation of our systems, our processes, our IT, everything. It sounds like we're turning a cruise ship. So how do we get everybody to buy into this new vision? Was there any type of, I would say, resistance towards where we were going when you talked about the change of the foundation that we needed to grow so we can then grow in the future? All right, guys, welcome back to a brand new episode of the Hart and Hustle podcast. Now, today is going to be an amazing conversation because I have Jon Morris, who sits across the table from me. He is the president and CEO of HopeTree. Jon, thanks for joining me, man.
Keenan, it's my pleasure to be with you. Really looking forward to this.
I think it's really important for us to talk about the amazing impact that you guys are having at HopeTree. But before we kind of get there, I want to hear a little bit more about your origin story. Now, you said when you were a senior in high school, you had a football coach, I believe, to ask you to volunteer at an event, and it showed you that you love doing the work that you do here today. What was that about?
Yeah, when I was in school, I was not a very good student. I only did enough to allow me to continue to play sports. And my senior year, a lot of my friends were getting ready to go off to college, and they all had plans, and I really didn't have anything in mind as to what I wanted to do. And, I had taken a psychology class, and the only reason I took the psychology class is the girl I was dating was taking the class. So I thought, hey, yeah, it'd be a good class. But, my football coach was asked to have some players come together at around Christmas time and to volunteer for these low-income children. And it was a neat idea. I'd never heard of it before, but how it came about is that the football players would come into this church, and these children would come in the morning, and we would do activities and crafts with them. And they kind of aligned us like a big brother, little buddy type thing. And so we did that in the morning, and we did crafts around Christmas. And then we went to a little department store, and we had money that the kids could spend on their families for Christmas. And so we did that. We helped them pick out items. And then when we came back to the church, we had lunch, and then Santa came, and then Santa gave the kids some gifts. And it was just a real neat experience. But that's really what triggered me into thinking, wow, the impact that we had on those kids for that short amount of time, it really just spoke to me, and it did something to me that day. And I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but I knew from that moment that I wanted to work with kids. And then, you couple that with the psychology classes and talking about what people deal with and what they go through in their life. It just clicked at that moment. I didn't know long term, but I just wanted to help kids. And at that point, that was my focus.
How did it feel when you were showing up to that event that day? Me being an athlete when I was in high school, there was almost a sense of pride that you held when you were giving back to the community, because little ones often looked up to you as somebody who was, I wouldn't say a hero, but somebody who they wanted to emulate, because you were somebody who was in high school, you're playing football, you're the guy. And so it had to feel really good to set that subconscious example for giving back in the community at that point in time.
You described it perfectly. I grew up in a small town in Southwest Virginia, and, football was huge. We didn't have that big of a town, but I know almost everybody in town was at the games on Fridays. And so when we showed up, of course, we had our jerseys on, and the kids flocked to that. But even in our school, Keenan, we had individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And I remember early on, we would wear our jerseys on Friday, and those kids would come up to us and pat us on the back. And, our coach often talked to us about how we represent ourselves in the community. And how we represent each other, and how people are watching us, and that we can make a huge impact if we choose to. And so I think everything that he taught us coming up, and then just seeing the reaction of people when you go in town and you're wearing that jersey, and on Saturday mornings after a big win, I mean, it meant something to our community. And so at that moment, it showed me the importance of doing the right thing, associating yourself with the right people, the power of a team, and how important it is to give back. I mean, and you think that those things might not come across in a small town, but man, it was on display where I grew up a lot.
I mean, it changed the trajectory of your life. You know what I mean? Those subconscious examples of being a leader, showing up with the jersey on, people look up to you. Sports have instilled that sense of character in me, right? I'm going to show up not for myself, but for everybody else around me. And if we can have a positive impact, we're going to do right by everybody else. And I feel like we don't get those lessons a lot in today's society unless you're a part of a team like that.
You know, everything that I learned in high school football, high school basketball, and then when I went to college, I went to a small Division III college, and I ended up playing club lacrosse for 3 years. And everything I've learned in sports, it translates to my career. You know, the value of preparation, the value of working hard, the reality of understanding that you can do all the right things and still not be successful or not achieve the goal that you want. But it's not necessarily about that goal. It's about that striving and that just getting better every day. And to me, there's nothing more exciting than bringing a group of individuals together and accomplishing something bigger or greater than you can imagine. And so all of that is 100% transferable to the workplace. And we deal with that all the time. You deal with so many different characters, so many different peoples with strengths. So many, some people are, quote unquote rock stars, and some people are still trying to find their way. But, to be that coach, to be that motivator, to instill that discipline, not only with our teammates, but ourselves. And even at HopeTree, we use the phrase teammates. I know some organizations like to use family, but I like to use the word teammates because, that denotes that we're a group of people committed to our mission, committed to our cause, striving to achieve something together. And everything that I've learned, it is 100% transferable.
It's really interesting. Over the weekend, I was doing a little bit of prep for today's conversation, and just so happened that there was a Warriors preseason game on. Steph Curry, Steve Kerr, and another player were standing there, and they were all joking around because they were so tight about the season that was upcoming. And after they hopped off the broadcast, they said, we were all a part of a championship team together. There are few experiences in life together that bring us together for a shared experience. So much of today's society is based on individualism and isolism and me getting after it as an individual. But when you can unite a group of people together and you can put all of your energy together to have an impact, a cause, that bonds you. And I wish that we had more of that teammate mentality in the work that we do, because showing up together, impacting the community and, impacting lives like you do, that's a special bond that a lot of people need to lean into a little bit more.
Absolutely. And Keenan, you talk about having that special group. The part that a lot of leaders don't like to talk about too often is, it's hard enough to bring that group together because everybody has competing priorities. Everybody has different short-term goals, long-term goals. Everybody has different experiences. And sadly, sometimes that means you have to exclude certain people from being on the team because they can negatively impact the entire team. And this whole concept about individualism versus the team, when you're coming up in the field, when you start your career, it's all about individual accomplishments. Are you capable of succeeding? Can you deliver? But then the higher you go into an organization, it really does become less about you and more as the team. And can you sacrifice your individual goals for the team goals? And, what's interesting is so many people cannot do that in the short term, but in the long term, it really pays off better for you to be able to do that. You get everything you want and more if you sacrifice your individual accolades for the accolades of the team or for the betterment of the team. But it's one of those weird dynamics that come into play, whether you're on an athletic team or in the workforce. And, it's not easy to bring all those folks together. And it's something that never, just like the Warriors. I mean, they've had some pretty dynamic teams and they've had some pretty lean years. And it takes the right mix and constantly looking at your mix, keeping a pulse on the dynamic of your team. Are we still striving together? Are we still rowing the boat in the same direction, or are we not? And it's something you can never take for granted. It's something you can never think that you've arrived and think that everything's going to be okay because we're good now. Doesn't mean we're going to be good in 3 months or 6 months.
Man, there's a real conversation about leadership here that I want to double click on. When we come through our careers, very much like you said, individual accolades, executing on the tasks that we're given, being the high performer gets us so far. But then we have to flip the script and become the empowerer of the people around us. Why do you think we're in such a leadership crisis, if you will, here in society today, with your 2 cents on how the landscape kind of looks for the future?
Oh, that's a big, big question. I do ultimately think it comes down to ego. I think it comes to an inability, not maybe an inability, but a lack of desire to humble ourselves. And we are in this age of self-promotion, which I understand, people are buying your brand, which is important. But you always have to counterbalance that with the team. And, I've been through a lot of situations where I failed the ego test tremendously. And, I've had to really come to grips with making amends, with apologizing. I've had to ask myself, Jon, why are you so upset about this? Does it really matter? Is this about your ego? Is this about you needing to project a certain image or about you needing to get the credit? And there's so many times where I've had to say, yes, I wanted the credit. And I've learned that getting the credit is a very shallow win. The win is when your team wins, is when your team knows that they are a big reason why we are successful. That ego just rears up, and sometimes we mask it. And but I think that humbling ourselves too, just to admit when we're wrong, to admit when we screw up, to acknowledge that we don't have all the answers. And it wasn't too long ago that leaders, they had to have all the answers. They had to be the smartest in the room. And I already told you that I did not apply myself when I was in high school. If I'm dependent on to be the smartest in the room, we're in trouble. So, that's just my 2 cents. I think that, just making it less about ourselves, and really meaning that, really making it less about ourselves. And I understand that I'm the face of the organization. I understand that there's times I have to step up and I have to be out front, but I don't need to do it all the time. And really when I need to be out front is when we're apologizing, when we're admitting that we fell short, when we're admitting that, what we thought was going to happen didn't. But it's about everybody else. It's about the team. It's about the people we serve. So that's just my 2 cents on it.
No, man, I completely agree. I mean, there's a certain burden that leadership has. It's to take a little bit more of the blame than often sometimes we deserve, and it's to pass along, right, the kudos to the team that executes on the great job that they do. But a lot of leaders struggle. My mom said something very impactful to me every day when I would leave to go to school. She'd say, Keenan, be a leader, not a follower. And being a leader often means going against the grain and doing things that people aren't willing to do in certain situations. And I feel like you said, in this world of personal brand and self-promotion, we often want to take all of the accolades. But I think there's a subconscious voice in the back of our head that often says, if you want to go far, go together. If you want to go quickly, go by yourself. And I think we need to lean into that team element a little bit more today in this individualized society.
I love that. I love that. And I've had to learn too, to allow the people I supervise to make their own decisions and to do things the way they want to do them. I was very fortunate and very blessed early in my career that, I had some really good mentors. I had people that poured into me, and the programs I was involved in and leading were pretty successful. And, but then when I started hiring people and our team grew, I didn't realize it at the time, but I was trying to hire people that did things like me, but that didn't work out too well. I mean, I have a lot of deficiencies, right? And the beauty of the team is when people with different strengths bring their different strengths together, and we can utilize all of those things. But I also realize that, I made a lot of mistakes and I learned from them. I'm constantly learning from my mistakes, but I want them to learn from that too. And so if I dictate to them how they need to do something, well, they're not going to learn from that. In fact, they could give less effort if I'm dictating everything that they're doing, because that means they have less ownership in it. And so I've learned to go along, even if I don't agree, as long as everything aligns with our core values and what we're hoping to achieve in our mission, to let them seek out their own way. And my job then is to help them learn through it. And I can learn through it too, because if they're doing something in a different way that I would do it, then it's helping me grow as well.
What we're really talking about is an element of trust here. Now, this has been the biggest maturation process for me over, I'm going to say, the last 5 years, is putting trust into other people to execute on the vision that we establish as a group. But I know a lot of leaders struggle with that, because often we have, this is my baby fallacy. I'm responsible here, so I'm not going to let other people, have the trust and the ability to execute like they deserve. How did you learn this lesson yourself? Because there's a lot of putting down our ego here. There's a lot of putting trust into other people. Did you have experiences where you maybe hired somebody who was doing it just like you, but you found yourself having to micromanage that individual because they were just as smart as you were in the area of expertise, I guess?
I think where I learned a lot of this is like so many things that I've been involved with over the years through my failures. Early on, I worked for an organization called Total Action for Progress, and we worked with fathers and ex-offenders, and we had some success and we started growing. We eventually became the largest male involvement fatherhood initiative in the state of Virginia, and so we were hiring people, and because people didn't do things the way I would do them or when I necessarily expected they would be done, I would respond in a way that wasn't helpful. And so thankfully, the people I had on my team gave me the feedback that what I was doing was not helpful. Once I went to another organization where it was much larger. I mean, we had 800, team members, and there were people that had expertise that I was not close to touching. I mean, it was a behavioral health, mental health organization, and we had so many top-notch clinicians. I couldn't tell them how to do their job. I did not know. They had forgotten more about therapy and counseling and clinical interventions than I ever knew. So I had to learn to trust those individuals. I had to, early on, I had to learn to allow people, I could give the non-negotiables, when this was due, what was the expectation, things like that. But then how they went about it was up to them. I learned through hiring some people that were similar to me that didn't mean it was going to work out for the team, didn't mean they were going to be successful. And so I learned, whether it was somebody in finance that had a whole different skill set than me. Yeah, they didn't approach things the way I did, but maybe that's a good thing, And so I think it's through over the years, just, working with all different kinds of people and then seeing, when things work, that, hey, especially if they worked in a way that it wasn't my idea, that, all right, this can work. First of all, John, you don't know everything. Second, there's some really talented people around you. And my faith is very important to me. And, my pastor has been probably one of the single greatest influences on my life. And, when we were learning about the principle of stewardship, it's the idea that, this isn't mine, what I'm doing. I'm a caretaker of this role. I'm a caretaker of this team. I'm a caretaker of this organization. And, just like we talked about in sports, you can do all the right things and still lose. You can do all the right things and still fall short. But what I've learned as a result of my faith and my faith journey is that, you can sometimes fall short of doing things right, and the outcome is still going to be okay. I mean, God can still bless that, but sometimes you can still do everything right, but ultimately it's up to God for the results. And so I've learned to trust that, if I focus on what I'm putting into it, and if I do things the right way, and if our team can go about doing things the right way, then you know what? We can live with the results, and we're okay with them, because sometimes you win, sometimes you don't. And, it's the progress, it's the journey. And I've really learned that over the last several years with all of my experiences.
I mean, this is the beautiful part about having that competitive background, right? Is we can now apply ourselves to a season of business, right? That is going to be much longer than our athletic career. So that personal development, continuing to learn from our failures and our lessons learned, helps us be successful in situations like what we're doing here now at HopeTree. I want to talk a little bit about what were some of the current challenges that you guys are taking on at HopeTree, some of the things that you guys have been doing to, create that opportunity for excellence that I know you guys are pursuing. So what's the current landscape look like, and where are we going?
I've been here for a little over 5 years, and I recognized that when I came into the role, there were a lot of people here that have done a lot of good things. HopeTree's been around now for 134 years. And so that doesn't happen by accident. And that means the agency was always evolving at the right time. And I think when I stepped into the role, we were at another inflection point where it was time to evolve. And so, we had almost everything was being done on paper. We did not have an electronic health record. We did not have a human resources information system that was very functional. Our accounting system was outdated. Our IT infrastructure was in really, really bad shape. So just from an infrastructure standpoint, from a system standpoint, we were pretty poor. We were not up to date on technology. And when you looked at all that, we had not grown in some time, added a lot of new programs. And the organization was about a $16 million a year organization, 220 employees. You don't get there by accident, right? A lot of good things, but we had gotten complacent and we had become a little bit insular to where, there was no growth. And so, in order to get us back on that trajectory, the first thing we did was rewrite our mission statement, review our core values and our vision. And then we also developed some strategic objectives. And, over the course of the last, 5 years, it's really been about getting the right people on the bus. As Jim Collins would say in his book, Good to Great, and making sure those people are in the right seat. We had to do heavy lifts and, doing big evolution in an organization can be exhausting. Mm-hmm. And there are some people that really excel in that. Some people do not. And some people love the reorganization and charting a new course. And some people are, they're better at, hey, you fix it. I'll come in and I'll manage it and I'll run it. And so, having the right people come in, establishing our goals. Our 2 goals at HopeTree are very simple. Number 1 is we want to be the premier faith-related nonprofit human services organization in Virginia. And I tell our team all of that all the time, that there are a lot of really great organizations out there. But when we think about being the premier, we want to be the one that people think of when they have a referral to make. We want to be the one that they think of when they are applying for jobs. We want to be the one that people think of that they're going to get a lot of value. And the second goal is we want to be the best place anyone has ever worked. And I have people come up to me over the last 5 years, Keenan, and they let me know, Jon, this has not been the best place I've ever worked. And And I want to hear the tough stuff. I want to hear where we have fallen short, and, getting everybody on the team that is really rowing the boat in that direction, because it's very easy to say, hey, we love our core values, but it's another thing to have leaders say, I'm going to live these core values. Because I did challenge our team. I said, when we put our core values on paper and our board of trustees approves them, we've got to live these. I don't want to work for an organization that these values look nice on a wall, or they look great in a brochure, but the people inside of them, they don't recognize what we're talking about. And so it's hard. Once again, that comes down to humility. It comes down to being accountable. It comes down to being very honest and open with how we're doing, but yet always striving for excellence, that we are always going to get better. And so I think that's where we've been over the last couple of years. And even over the last 6 months, we've really been focused on our systems. Our internal systems were not as tight as they needed to be. There were little different expectations across the organization. And I think just seeing our team come together over the last 3 to 6 months to pull all of that together has been very gratifying. And then we know, because at the end of this, once we get our systems tightened up, once we get our processes, our policies and procedures in a good place, well, then we can think about growth, and we can talk about what's next on the horizon, and whether it's in a new locality, a new market, a new service line, is very, very exciting to me. And so I think it all starts with the core values, the mission, and constantly repeating yourself as a leader, because, people learn differently, and sometimes people need to hear things a lot, but they also need to see my words align with my actions, with what we are saying as the organization is where we're striving to be. But it's not just me, it's every leader in the organization that must do the same thing.
So how do we implement big changes like we're talking about here? You come into an organization 130 plus years old, right? They've been doing things the same way for a long time. So that creates that sense of complacency of saying, we've always done it this way. You come in and say, we need to get the foundation of our systems, our processes, our IT, everything. It sounds like we're turning a cruise ship. So how do we get everybody to buy into this new vision? Was there any type of, I would say, resistance towards where we were going when you talked about the change of the foundation that we needed to grow so we can then grow in the future? What was that like?
It was massive, and it was exhausting, and we're not done yet. And I'll be very honest, Keenan, when any CEO comes in and has to make a massive change, especially, when I'm succeeding a long-term executive director who is beloved by a lot of individuals and is a very good man, to say we need to change, it unsettles a lot of people, particularly if individuals don't see the need to change. And so one of the things HopeTree had going for them is a lot of long-time employees who have been here many, many years. That can be a very good thing, but then it can be a detriment because you don't see what else is out there and what other people are doing. I'll be very honest, we lost a lot of people, and that was heartbreaking for me. I thought naively that, we just tell people where we want to go, and it's not out of the question. It's not something massive, at least in our industry. But the reality is a lot of people did not want to go. Thankfully, we had a longtime vice president and chief operations officer that was here. He just retired last April. He had been here for 40 years. Everything that we were doing, he had my back on. We had departments that were struggling mightily. And we had one department in particular that was going to the board of trustees, telling them that what I was doing was going to bring the agency down. And I knew that this was happening. But I resolved a long time ago, Keenan, that I was going to be the same with our team members as I am with our board of trustees, as I am with a big donor or a partner. I never wanted someone, for example, to come to my church, to visit my church and say, wow, Jon's totally different at church than he is at work. And I didn't want my family to have a different, sometimes we can be the best version of ourselves, but not so great at home because we've spent all of our energy. I really wanted to be the same person everywhere. And that means I will be very honest and transparent and authentic to everyone. And so there were some losses that occurred that some members of our board got really anxious about. And if it wasn't for Johnny Nash, our chief operations officer, because he had been here a long time, they started going to him and saying, hey, do we need to be worried? And at every time he said, no, he's doing what needs to be done. And thankfully, all of those folks who were going to the board and who was going behind our back, and honestly, Keenan, they were hoping that we would fail. They're no longer here. And my prayer since I've been here is God send the right people. And he has been faithful. So Johnny's replacement, our new COO, is amazing. She came in and she was able to identify so many gaps that we had been striving to close, but we're not there yet. Our CFO is the best CFO I've ever worked in. And I've worked for an organization that was a national organization that had thousands of employees, and she is that top notch. Our chief advancement officer has re-engaged our organization with donors and potential donors in a way that wasn't there before. Our chief clinical officer, our chief compliance. I mean, I could go on and on about the quality of people. But thankfully, our board didn't jump ship on what needed to happen. Thankfully, Johnny Nash had my back and, encouraged the board that we're doing the right thing. And we had enough people that left their comfort zone and to say, this isn't working. We need to fix this. And to give us that feedback in real time. But it's exhausting. And thankfully, if you go too fast, then you're going to lose some people. If you go too fast, you're going to make people nervous. But then if you wait too long, you're putting the organization at great risk. And so we really tried to communicate as much as possible. We tried to bring people on board. I'm not a kind of leader that comes in and says, all right, you need to leave. I want to bring my people in. I really have this philosophy that, hey, what we're doing is not, we just want to treat people the right way. We want to make sure that we can prove that our services are good. We want to make sure that we're engaging people to strengthen the organization and, give them that time to come on board. And, but ultimately they make that choice if they want to come on board with us. And, thankfully we've had enough people to stay. Johnny stayed through his retirement and God has sent the right people to get us across that finish line, because even the gaps that we still have, it was out of my realm of expertise to close it. I mean, I could look at it and say, this isn't working. But that's where these other people are coming in and they're the ones closing the gap. I mean, I'm just, all right, help me, let me know what I need to do to clear the way. And I've got your back. And it's a beautiful thing to see right now.
Yeah, it sounds like you've been able to build a healthy skill set in the organization of leaning into curiosity. Because very transparently in the human services space, what got us here is not going to get us there, right? We have huge demand in our communities. We need to be able to inspire the next generation of people who are going to come do this work. So how are you thinking about that skill set of curiosity from your own personal leadership perspective?
I think it drives me a lot. The one thing that I do understand is that people do not like change. Mm-hmm. But the other thing is that I've realized is that nothing ever stays the same. I remember when I started working at Family Preservation Services, and I was working with all those clinicians, and I started at the organization as an assistant state director, and then after about 6 months, I was appointed the state director, CEO. And I remember being so overwhelmed at the prospect of what can I offer these folks. I mean, these are people that have been in that particular industry their whole career. I had not. These are people that knew the clinical models, the payment structures, the relationships with MCOs, electronic health records, HIPAA laws. I mean, I knew none of this. And my only thought is, how can I be of value to these folks? And I remember I committed myself at that point that I was going to do everything in my power to get better. And I remember picking up a book by Tim Ferriss called Tools of Titans. And I started getting up at 5 a.m. every morning. I would work out and I would read for at least 30 minutes, sometimes an hour every morning. I would read the Bible, I would do my devotionals, and then I would read some kind of business topic book, some kind of leadership or growth topic. Because no matter what the organization is, I might not have been good enough to come in and, give a lot of wisdom on the clinical side. But when you're dealing with people, I mean, it's all leadership. Like John Maxwell says, everything rises and falls on leadership. And so it's about the human condition. It's about working in teams. It's about accomplishing something together. It's about, all right, we're here right now, but how do we get here? And so that's where I could help. And so at that point, I was just not only curious about leadership, but to be able to be of value to our clinicians, I had to learn as much about the industry, about our payers, and about the clinical interventions and models so I could be of value. So thankfully, I had really good people that wanted to educate me on what they did as much as I wanted to learn. And so for me, it was like this constant, let me learn. But then I took it a step further because everything I was learning, I wanted to pass off. I wanted to give away. So what I was learning on the clinical side and from what I was learning operationally on how to lead a $47 million organization with 800 employees, I had to bring all that information in, but then I had to also share it. And so I would take the lead on training on some of these topics, or at least the beginning, and then pass it off to the experts because I needed to know it for myself. There is a very fine line in letting somebody, one of your leaders, take the lead on it. And they should take the lead on as much of it as possible. But then I could very easily abdicate my responsibility for learning because of their competence. Yeah. Now, as the leader, I do have to set the tone. I do have to walk the walk. But that means I also have to be as knowledgeable as I can. I'll never know as much as they do. But I need to be able to help them through their pain points. And so thankfully, it was through the reading. It was through all of the books, the podcasts, the trainings, the education I was getting from them, and then me just wanting to give it away. And so I saw a lot of what I do is I just share. Now, what that also does, though, is when you start sharing this stuff, people start saying, well, John, you say that, but I saw you last week. You didn't respond like that, which meant I had to humble myself many, many times to say, you're right. I'm not there yet, but I want to get there, and I'm going to get there with you. And there's this term in this book called Scaling Leadership called leading loudly. And a lot of people in organizations are afraid to lead loudly because it means you open yourself up to criticism. It means you open yourself up to acknowledging, yep, I fell short that time, because so often leaders, they think they have to have it all figured out. They have to be perfect. Sometimes what we bring across is that you can't hold me accountable. You can't call me out. My job is to call you out. Well, at HopeTree, our core value of accountability says, well, we're first accountable to God, but then we hold ourselves accountable. We hold everybody else accountable last. We've got to start with us first. And so I think that curiosity, thing is just so powerful. And JJ Redick had a quote on one of his podcasts. He said, we are never arriving. We're always becoming. And what's really cool about that is JJ Redick is from where I live, Roanoke, Virginia. He grew up here, and I wish he would have went to Virginia Tech to play ball, but it worked out for him. But I love that quote. I mean, we never arrive. We are always becoming every single day.
When did that realization happen for you? Now, I want to kind of put some context around this. Never was the best student, right? Never really enjoyed school. Did exactly what you talked about as a senior in high school. Just did the bare minimum so I could play sports, right? But then one day I had a mentor say, Keenan, you're going to have to become something, or you're going to have to turn pro at something other than baseball. And in that moment, my competitive spirit kicked in. And so I said, if I can apply myself and then learn as much as I possibly can about business, I can be great here. When was your aha moment, or when did that switch flip for you, where you wanted to start consuming knowledge, waking up at 5 a.m., learning about leadership so you could, pour into other people around you? When did that happen?
I think before I started really waking up and engrossing myself in all these books and trying to get better. I remember an incident back when I worked for Total Action for Progress that I'm not very proud of. So I had a mentor, and I had a couple that would pour into me, and I would call them up when my boss would do something that would make me mad. And I remember I called up my mentor one time and I said, "Can you believe what she did?" And he said, "Well, you were wrong." And I'm like, hold up, you're supposed to be my mentor. You're supposed to have my back. He's like, "You're wrong." And I remember there was a situation where I would have disagreements with my supervisor, and I would go back to my team and complain about her. And I remember we were in a staff meeting one time, and they were responding to her in a way that was not professional, in a way that was not Christ-like, in a way that was just not, you would not want anybody to do that. But what they had done is they had taken on my frustration and turned it around on her. And we would battle. She would try to embarrass me because I would challenge her. Mm-hmm. I would challenge her, and I would try to flex my muscle a little bit. I felt that I felt I should have been in her role. If I'm very honest, that hurts to say that, to admit it. And we got into it one day. And she took me into the big boss, the CEO of the company. And he had a couple of sessions with us before. And then, when we went to meet with him, he said, "All right, tell me your side." And she told him his side. And then he said, "John," and I thought it was my turn to speak. And I started giving him my side, which I felt very justified. And he said, and he yelled at me. Haven't been yelled at since I was in practice, right, in sports. He said, "She's your boss. I don't care what she tells you to do unless it's illegal or unethical. You do it. Stop being disrespectful." And I remember I left that day, and I was so angry going to the parking lot. By the time I got to my car, I had tears coming out. I was so mad. And so I'm going home and I'm praying. And I get home and I open up my Bible. I'm so mad. I'm just going to open up my Bible and I'm going to find something to justify why I'm being wrong. But an amazing thing happened. I went to this portion of scripture where David was already anointed king, and he was supposed to be in line to be the next king, but Saul was still king. And Saul was trying to kill David. Now, my situation was nothing like that. She wasn't trying to kill me, right? But Saul was trying to kill David. Well, David had an opportunity to kill Saul, and he wouldn't do it. And he said, "I will not touch the Lord's anointed." David humbled himself that even though Saul was trying to kill him, he was like, my job is to be faithful to God. And I came back, and because of that, I apologized to her. I apologized to the big boss. I did not want to be that way. But it was humbling. It was humbling. And at that point, I realized, all right, all your success, it's not been through your team, because how you're leading your team is not helping the team get better. And at that point, it might have been a little bit too much about me. And so I think that lesson at that point, and my mentor telling me that I was wrong, and the scripture I went to was all like, all right, you've got to go a different path. And it is not about you. It is about, there is something much bigger going on here than you. And it's about, how can you interact with others? How can you make an impact in others, growing people where they need to be, but then humbling myself as well. And so, that's when I really started picking up a book and say, okay, well, I think my first book might have been a John Maxwell book. All right. And well, that sounds good, but man, it's hard in practice. And, I could go on and on about many other failures. But I think it was in those type of moments through my failures that I realized, and then I could step back and say, wow, I've seen this leadership in these folks. I've seen this over here. I've seen poor leadership here. Do I do that? And so it takes this level of self-awareness to really sit with, how you are impacting others. Is your impact helping achieve the team goals, things of that nature? And that self-awareness is painful. It's so much easier to deflect and to blame than to sit and look and see where you are falling short as a leader.
I mean, there's a sense of a personal accountability there. And we talked about the value that you guys have. That sense of ultimate accountability means I need to show up better for myself so I can show up better for everybody else as well. And when I think about the measuring stick, right, that we will all be as leaders of organizations kind of measured at the end of our time, is how much did we lift our team members around us. It's not just about the Keenan and John show, but it's about how we lift everybody up around us. There's a humility element in there, which is so powerful. John, if you could go back to that young version of yourself and had a 5-minute conversation where you could instill some wisdom and knowledge into that younger version of John, what would you say to him?
I think what I would say is, just focus on serving other people, because I was doing that, but sometimes you can do the right things with the wrong motive. I felt, because we had success and because we had been recognized for that, I felt that I always had to deliver the result. And so when we didn't deliver, there were times where I would look to place blame, or when I wasn't placing blame, I was definitely trying to take the heat off of me. I've had to learn that results come and go. Now, I'm still very competitive. I want to win in everything I do. And I'm very bad at celebrating wins. When something really good happens, I'm like, yay, what's next? Because there's always something next, right? But I think it would be, look, just stop focusing on the results. Stop focusing on the wins. They will come in due time. Focus on the people, and I think when I started off, it's easy to focus on the people when you have really high performers and when everything's going your way. Where it really shows if you're focused on the people is when it starts going bad, or when you have to start holding others accountable, or when you have to really manage people through hard situations. That's when it gets tough. And so ultimately, at the end of the day, even now, it's about the people. It's always about the people. It's about the relationship. Early on, I despise politics. And what I mean by that is, there's always people who will manipulate things in order to achieve what they want to achieve. And so and I don't always find those individuals to be very authentic. And to me, to be very authentic in myself is very important. And that's what I hope in all of our leaders. You know, I remember early on, I tried to speak like other people spoke. It was a disaster. I tried to interact how other people did. It was a disaster because that's their gift. I had to really learn what my gifts were and then walk in those gifts and learn to say no to the things I'm not good at. And, but when I despised the politics of it, I pulled away a little bit, sometimes from making relationships, because I didn't want it to seem that I was creating relationships only to get what I wanted. And what I didn't realize is that external relationships, internal relationships, it's all so important. But what I should have done early on is, in creating those relationships, how can I bring value? Instead of thinking that I'm only getting involved in this relationship so we can get value, so I can get value, or my team. And which is a very short-sighted way. It's a very transactional way of doing things. And I think now I realize that, like, it is all about the relationships. It's about the people. It's about, you know, just being helpful to somebody else. And, you know, and thankfully I've learned that through my pastor. I've learned that through some really good people in my life. And at the end of the day, if you don't get the credit or the recognition, that stuff's fleeting, right? It really doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it's the impact on the people, on the organization, are other people's lives being improved. And early on, I just don't think I appreciated it the way I do now.
Yeah. I mean, the growth in leadership is something that we need to talk a little bit more about, you know, because everybody thinks, like we've talked about from the very beginning of this conversation, that often when you're highly skilled at one thing, that means you're a great leader. But the culmination of all the experiences that we have, the losses, being able to lean into the uncomfortable moments, helps us be an even better leader. Jon, I want to give you a last couple minutes here on the podcast to talk about where we're going, right? What's the vision and the vision that you're casting for HopeTree going to look like over the next 5 years? Where are you taking us?
Yeah, you know, one of the big things we are undertaking is the redevelopment of our campus. And so HopeTree, we started off as the Baptist Orphanage of Virginia back in 1890. And so for many years, we were an orphanage. And we had up to 250, 300 kids on this campus. And, you know, we'll never have that many kids on this campus again. And it's because of the changing regulations and the changing laws. I mean, there's no state-funded, at least that I know of, state-funded orphanages anymore. The people we see now, they have a lot more mental health challenges, mental health issues. And so we're becoming a more mental health, behavioral health organization. And so on the campus redesign, you know, right now our headquarters is on about 60 acres. And so we've been in the process for the last 2 to 3 years to redesign this campus, to turn it into a mixed use development. So we you know, on about 30 acres of our campus, we're going to bring in housing, and it's going to be a mix of, you know, single family, townhomes, small apartment buildings. We want to bring in some limited commercial aspect, like a small restaurant or a corner store or a little coffee shop. We want this community to be very integrated, so sidewalks everywhere, walking trails everywhere. And so that's huge for us because, I mean, this place was home for a lot of people, and it brought up a lot of negative feelings early on when we started talking about this. But the reality is that HopeTree's never going back to that 250 bed facility again. And so the most children we'll ever serve on this campus again are 16. If we want to grow our children's residential program, we've got to do it elsewhere in already established communities that are integrated. And so that's what we're trying to do, integrate this community. And so when we came up with this redesign concept, we had 3 goals that we wanted to meet with whatever we were going to do. And we did not know what we were going to do. But our first goal we wanted to do is to honor the history of this great organization. And And I recognize every day that we stand on the shoulders of giants that have labored here to get us to this point. And so we don't want to forget that. While we are going to be different in the services we provide, we should never forget where we came from. And so number one is to honor our history. Number two, while we need to honor our history, we cannot be beholden to our history. And so we have to position ourselves for future success. And so what this development is going to do is we're not just selling off some of our buildings and properties, but we're going to invest about 10 to 15 million into our own facilities and upgrading our own facilities because I want us to be able to position ourselves for the next 20, 30 years for future success. And then our third goal is we want this to be something that our community will be proud of. And there are people that oppose this community. There are people that oppose what we're trying to do. But I feel very strongly that in 10 years, in 15 years, they're going to look back. The one thing I want them to do is to say they did it right. But I want them to look back too and say, you know what, it did turn out for the best. And so that's consuming a lot of our time and a lot of our energy. And once again, that's why I thank God the people that he sent is because it's allowing me to focus more on the development and the future of HopeTree because our people are focusing on the day-to-day in the programs. And like I said, we do want to expand our footprint. We are currently in 20 locations across the state. We have some locations in mind that we want to expand to over the next 5 years. Definitely more clinical, more community-based, more home-based, because that's where services occur best is when we can serve people where they live. They still might need to come to us for residential, but only for a short period of time. We want to be able to reunify the families that can reunify, keep families together before their kids come into the system. But then if that doesn't work, we want to be able to find children permanency. We want them to be able to find families that they can live and thrive in. And so a lot more behavioral health, mental health focus here into the future.
I mean, I'm really excited to follow along with your guys' journey, Jon. You guys are doing some amazing work, and the impact that you guys are having in your community is absolutely phenomenal. One of the traditions that we have here on the podcast is our previous guest asked you a blind question. Now, the guest wanted to ask you this question, so I'm really interested on your perspective. How did you know you shouldn't give up?
Wow. I mean, there's so many ways I could go with this. I've never given up easily on things. We didn't talk about this, Keenan, but, I was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer not too long ago. And, about 2 years ago. When I first came to HopeTree, 3 months after I got here, I was diagnosed with cancer, had a kidney removed, had 2 portions of my lung removed. And, I was still working, even during those treatments. I go to Atlanta for treatment every 6 weeks. And I come back and, of course you have people saying, you should retire or step aside, focus on your health. And I am, my health's not taking a back seat. But I mean, I'm just as driven today as I was pre-diagnosis. There's been so many times where, when I got my surgery the first time is when COVID shut down America. And so I remember being on the phone with our leadership team, just trying to help coordinate how are we going to maintain staffing in the homes. We serve 80 adults with intellectual disabilities. How do we explain this to them and help create a new normal for them, right? And it's just this realization, whether it's the diagnosis, whether it's, playing sports, or that other people are counting on me and I don't want to let them down. And so that's true with the failure. Yeah, I'm going to fail. I'm human. But I want to get better because I want to get better for them. you know. And I've seen what happens when you just persevere. It's that you just keep going. My favorite quote that I share with my team all the time is keep pressing, and it comes from the book of Philippians where it says, where the Apostle Paul says, I've apprehended all these things, but one thing I don't forget is to keep pressing towards the mark of the high calling. And so when I say keep pressing, good things happen if you don't give up. And, so it's not, I have had to learn some things you do need to give up and let go of because it's not worth it. But like the overall mission, that's always worth it. Your people going the extra step for them, they're always worth it. Seeing the people that we serve get better. I mean, that's always worth it, right? And so I don't know if it's come through my faith, through sports, through the situations I've been involved in, through people saying, look, I believe you, keep going, it's just a part of me. And I will say this, my mom, I shared this story with a group of our students last year. I remember, when I was an underperforming student, my mom worked many jobs, and she often worked 2 jobs at least. She worked as a meat wrapper in a grocery store. And so she was in this cooler all day. And I had gotten in trouble, done something or failed something. And I remember going to work to see her because she wanted to see me. And I was telling her, what had happened and giving her my side of the story. And she looked at me and she had tears in her eyes and she said, do you think I work this hard for you? And she showed me her chapped hands for you to do this. And my mom just had this amazing work ethic. She raised 4 of us by herself. She worked at Food Line. She worked at Hardee's at night. She was not going to be stopped. And I think that probably was instilled in me more than anything, that you work hard, you don't give up, especially to people that matter. And you're doing it for them, not for yourself.
Jon, I can't thank you enough, man, for coming on the podcast. Seriously, for sharing your story, the impact that you've had, the dedication to becoming great, but also how you continue to push forward in the face of adversity because you know that you have the opportunity to impact so many people around you, man, is truly inspiring. And so I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart and everybody else who's tuning in here today. Thanks for coming on the show, man. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. And I'm honored that you would even ask me. I love what you do. I love your podcast, and it really is an honor. So thank you from the bottom of my heart.